Lies of P, developed by NeoWiz and Round 8 Studio, both of which I've never heard of, but the game got some awards at Gamescom 2022 and was recently released, also to be part of Microsoft's Game Pass, which is a good reason for me to have a look at the game, and also because I'm a stingy motherfucker who doesn't like to spend any money. Now I found out pretty quickly that this game runs great while looking great as well. So perhaps you don't even need optimized settings, but don't go away just yet. No, there's enough to have a look at. So stick around with me and discover Lies of P's graphics together. And see if we can get some optimized settings. Welcome to Angus Gaming, guess who I am. So here I run the game at the best settings without any resolution scalers in place. Also without AMD's CACAO or CACAO, because I didn't yet knew what that was. So if you're wondering what that is, stick around. Maybe it's chocolate. As always, I try to get a few hours into the game to make the optimized settings, with at least a bit of playtime so I know I covered at least a few scenarios. Here those hours are spent at the first boss, where I got to see lie or die quite a few times. Every time I wanted to choose lie, but it's not really a choice. The developers thought it sounded cool, I guess. And thus, I died a lot of times. But every time I died, I did that with a beautiful frame rate though, being roughly between 80 and 90 FPS. So yeah, optimized settings aren't really required when running on a AMD 7700X and a GTX 4070 Ti. But still, let's have a look if we can improve the FPS just in case you are having more trouble running the game, or if you want to play at 120 FPS, which should be pretty doable. And here you have the game running on my optimized settings. I think the game still looks very good and still completely captures the dark and sinister vibe we all know from the Pinocchio fairy tale. The lowest FPS we see coming by is around 135, but generally I think we're in the 140s or 150s even, with some spikes in the 170s. Now the main reason we get a lot higher frame rates is of course because we use an upscaler, DLSS on quality in this case. If you need even more FPS and quality won't cut it, use the performance level. I'll put some of my FPS levels on screen so you can see how much DLSS already does the job and how much the rest of the optimized settings matter. Now, for these optimized settings, if you are really in a tight spot with your hardware and you want to get a bit more out of it, there, on screen you have it. Please note that I have also set a frame limit as well as VSync. Usually I would only set VSync, but I'll show you in a bit why this is. Also I have that CACAO turned on, which, as it turned out, has nothing to do with chocolate. If you find these settings helpful or useful, consider leaving a like, and after you've done that we'll have a look at most of the graphic detail settings, see what they do and in what way we compromise our graphics setting it lower than the best setting, and what is AMD going on about with their CACAO. I've put these settings in the description down below if you want to have a further look. And we'll start with the most important ones, VSync and the frame limit, because these always matter, also when you're playing on the best settings. When I enable just VSync and leave the frame limit to unlimited, my frame time is going completely nuts. So not every frame has an even amount of screen time, which will not result in tearing, but you will notice mini stutters. In footage shown, I've slowed time by half, so you can notice these stutters a bit better on YouTube. Now I don't know if you'll notice these stutters playing at 120 FPS, but playing on 60 FPS you'll find the image moving just that bit smoother when you set the frame limit to 60. This will make frame time even for every frame, and it's as fair to each frame of course. You don't love one frame more than the other, no, you love them equally, so they deserve equal screen time. Then we dive into the graphic detail settings, and these settings have an explanation beside them, but that isn't really helpful now, is it? The shadow quality option, for example, has the explanation beside it, sets the shadow quality. Yes, I would have guessed that much on my own I think, but thanks for the effort. Well, no worries, you have me to get into those settings. Onwards to visibility. And I've chosen a nice spot in front of the Krat Hotel, but you have to look carefully. Standing at the same distance you see that the visibility range of when objects appear in screen is different. Now I'm always a bit pop-in sensitive, so I would like the least pop-in or pop-in as far away as possible. FPS wise it doesn't really matter, so we'll leave this setting at best, but I got a bit curious how much the distance differed on different levels. So I had another quick look to see when things pop in. So we start at low, then just when the object disappears I switch the setting to medium, but I think I don't really see anything change. So again, walking away, and just when the objects disappear I change to high, and then we see the objects appear even from a little bit further away. Now moving away again, and just when the object disappears I switch to best, but now I don't see anything different. So best and high seem to use the same distance level, and medium and low both seem to use the same distance level. Now that was for objects appearing and disappearing. Visibility also seems to affect the level of detail. So when I'm running from this lantern, you see that on low the LOD switches. Because I want to go for the best setting, I quickly checked if the LOD also switches on best, and there it doesn't. So then it's definitive best for visibility. Post-processing is up next, and we see about a 3.5% difference in FPS, but I see no difference in graphics, to be honest. Post-processing often is something like depth of field or something, but I just don't see it. Checked this in another location as well, but here I don't see a difference again, not in graphics, but also not in FPS this time. So low for the optimized settings because of the FPS win you might get. For our next setting, I found that when moving the camera things could get weird. Shadow quality at best is what we're looking at. And that looks great, between 96 and 100 FPS I would say. Now switching to low, things get ugly. You see those shadows creeping around? That is not looking good. If I would encounter such a shadow in real life it would freak the hell out of me. But I do think we get a very little bit FPS extra. Maybe 1%, but it's certainly not worth the weird shadow effects. Did an extra test by moving around a bit more to see if we get this shadow effect on all settings. Currently running around on medium, and here we see nothing weird happening. So we could consider keeping the shadow quality at medium. Switching to low again, you see the shadow distance is very short. At least I think it's a distance thing. However, certainly not low. Now we're sticking around for the shadow quality a bit longer, as I found it also changes some behavior of lights. Now it could of course be a smart light with a sensor, but at the low setting we see the light is going out when we move away from it. Setting the shadow quality to medium doesn't really change this, and when we set the setting to high we see that we can move as far away as we want. The light stays on. So then we could go for high for this setting, but seeing the issues and with the minimal FPS win we get, let's just go for best. Our next one is a fun one. The vegetation quality. So you would assume it changes the amount or the fullness of plants or bushes. But those bricks laying around, that's not really vegetation, is it? Maybe it are big lumps of tofu. Not that tofu is vegetation, but it comes closer to vegetation than bricks. So let's just assume it are tofu blocks. But we notice a little bit less tofu blocks laying around on the high setting compared to the best setting. But I would still say it gives off a convincing vibe of clutter, tofu clutter, laying around. Seems in this shot we have an ever so slightly win in FPS. Could imagine if there's more clutter you get a bigger win in FPS. I would have expected this to use more or less CPU or VRAM, but I didn't really see a change in usage. But looking at medium and low, there we see that the puppets are probably hungry vegetarians and ate most of our tofu blocks. I think this will make the streets look a bit too empty, so I would recommend keeping this setting to high or maybe best. Now just for fun I had a look if this setting also actually changes vegetation, but yes it does, so the setting doesn't have a completely weird name. Well, enough about plants, let's go reflect things with the reflection quality settings. And things get reflected at about the same quality, I think. Not that much difference in these, but on medium and low we do see an improvement of FPS of a small 2%, I would say. So let's set this to low. I don't think you will notice this when playing. But what you will notice is the volumetric fog quality. And here we also immediately see that you don't want to set this setting lower than high. Volumetric fog and volumetric lighting play quite a big role in this game, feel and vibe the atmosphere. So we don't want to compromise that too much. Setting the volumetric fog quality to high, you get an FPS win of about 2%, which is not that much, but you also don't make a too big compromise. You still get the dark and gritty mood. If you ever need to tell the Pinocchio story to your kids, take some screenshots with this nice volumetric fog and have it as visual aid for your storytelling. I think Lies of P is wonderful for that. Well, let's move to one of the last settings I wanted to have a look at, Ambient Occlusion. Now in other games I always think you shouldn't turn off Ambient Occlusion because it makes objects less grounded in the world. But you can turn it to low because that usually is enough to make for a convincing presentation. And I think Lies of P is nothing different in that. Using the low setting I think objects are a bit too floaty, but setting this to medium makes objects grounded enough. Low however gives you the biggest FPS win of about 10%. Now there is this CACAO setting we still haven't had a look at. AMD FidelityFX or CACAO, CACAO, stands for Combined Adaptive Compute Ambient Occlusion. So let's say it's a highly optimized implementation of ambient occlusion. And for a nice boost in FPS with an even better looking ambient occlusion, I would suggest turning the normal ambient occlusion to low, but turning on the AMD CACAO. This runs better than only turning on ambient occlusion at the best setting, while looking even better I think. To get an idea, we quickly have a look at some shots without and with the AMD CACAO at the low ambient occlusion level. First off, we stay in our Hotel Krat. Now on the wall you'll notice that the corners have a bit more of a shadow in them with CACAO turned on. This looks better, especially since this is a darker and moodier game. These dark corner shadows have a great effect I think. And in this next shot, somewhere outside the Krat Hotel, you'll also see that there is more shadow on the ridges on the wall, but also under that beam above the windows. And the light shining on the glass seems different as well. I think it looks better, a bit less plain, or something. I don't know, but I like it. Keeping CACAO on. But that covers up my look at Lies of P. I was quite surprised by this game. All trailers I saw didn't really impress me, but playing the game, seeing how it runs and seeing how it looks, I think these fairly unknown developers have a strong title for an audience to get to know them. Now please consider subscribing to my channel, because I can also use an audience to get to know me. And if you're still playing Phantom Liberty, why not have a look at this video of mine? Otherwise, I'll hope to see you again in 2 weeks when I have a look at City Skylines 2. Well, thank you for watching and houdoe.